Very warm welcome to First Light Spotlight, Interior Tension. I'm curator and photographer Mario Popham, and I will be your host this evening. This is the very last of our First Light talks, expanding on the inaugural First Light project, which celebrates Northern graduates of 2020. Created by Waterside Trafford and Open Eye Gallery Liverpool, the First Light exhibition is currently on display at Castlefield Gallery New Art Spaces in Warrington until the 4th of July. And our First Light Tilt publication follows closely behind, launching next Thursday on the 1st of July. So the event will be free to attend. The launch event for the zine will be free to attend for the public, and you'll be able to book online on Eventbrite via the Open Eye Gallery website too. So, and the zine publication itself will be available online via Big Cartel, and the Open Eye Gallery will release more information about its release soon too. So look out for all of that. And yeah, please follow along on our Instagram, firstlight.photo, to find out more news as it comes along. So a bit more about the project before we introduce our guests. First Light aims to reflect the diversity of photography as practiced today at a time when, given the circumstances, we may all be reimagining our futures. In tonight's session entitled Interior Tension, we'll be talking about the project Home by Kaylee Clemenson. The recent experience of lockdown severely restricted our horizons to within our immediate domestic surroundings. Like much of the population, Kaylee Clemenson, who was then studying for her final year on a photography course at Hugh Baird University Centre, had to drastically adapt her plans to the new limitations in which she found herself. The resulting cinematic portraits and studies of silent spaces speaks to our common experience of lockdown, of internalized tension, and of lives caught in a state of suspense. Before we introduce our speakers, just a bit of housekeeping. As usual, we've enabled the chat function and the Q&A box below, so please do ask questions or comment throughout the event, and we will endeavour to answer your questions at the end. This is a safe space, and we ask that you're respectful to us and all of the other attendees. So without further ado, we'll introduce our guests this evening. We are joined by Kaylee Clemenson, the artist herself, and just to give you a bit more information about Kaylee. So Kaylee is a photographer who graduated from Hugh Baird University Centre and is currently based in Liverpool. Her approach to photography is heavily inspired by cinema, most notably the genres of science fiction and thriller. And she enjoys experimenting with composition and lighting in a way that evokes a strong sense of atmosphere and tension in the viewer. Hi, Kaylee, thanks for joining. Hi. We're also joined by artist and educator David Lockwood. Hello, David. Hi. David Lockwood is a Liverpool-based photographer who is active in both photography and photographic education, and is presently working as a photographer and course leader of the BA Honours degree in digital imaging and photography at the Hugh Baird University Centre in Liverpool. Alongside this, he is currently completing his PhD at Liverpool John Moores University. Recent project work includes The Allotments, which was exhibited as part of the Look Photo Biennial 2019, and involved David with writer Pauline Rowe and painter Arthur Lockwood. And his latest project, The New West, which continues David's interest in post-photographic agendas with a virtual reality exhibition created at the Open Eye Gallery as part of the Peer-to-Peer UK Hong Kong Online Festival. So thanks both for joining us. We're hoping to be joined by Adrienne Wilkinson, the writer who's collaborating with Kaylee, but sadly she wasn't able to attend the event. So I'll be doing a reading of the amazing text that she's written in response to Kaylee's work towards the end of this event, and trying to do it as justice as much as I can. So yeah, we'll talk to Kaylee. How did this project come about, really? Yeah, can you tell us a bit more about what this project involves, and how was this born this year? Last year, if you can give us some context as to yeah this project, and yeah.
Well, when the first lockdown came into play, we all kind of had other projects that we were originally working on for, some were working on for months, and then obviously when we found out that all the universities were closing down and we were all trapped at home, that we all had to change our project ideas. There wasn't really any other way around being able to follow through any of what we really wanted to do. We lost equipment, lost being able to go outside. So I think the chance to just be at home and just be only in these surroundings gave me a chance to kind of see the things around me in a new way.
Was it
So,
very different from what you had planned initially? What were your kind of interests
well,
really?
originally and throughout most of my 3 years at university, I really wanted to focus on fashion work and editorial. But obviously, you know, as the years went on, I realized how increasingly hard it was to follow through with work like that. You know, you need models, you need teams of people. But alongside the fashion, I always had an interest in cinematography, the lighting, the composition, you know, the way that kind of color can set such a tone and such a mood. So being trapped at home kind of, it was a curse being trapped at home, but also a blessing because it allowed me to experiment with something that I never really had tried out before. And it allowed me to realize that there were more avenues than the one that I just had set out in my head.
Okay, so
So
it's really quite a departure for you
yeah.
from fashion, with, like you say, with the assistants and
Mhm.
you know, the staff and the other creatives involved in a fashion shoot. This was, you know, you found yourself in a situation where, yeah, you didn't have access to these things, and basically
Yeah.
you were adapting basically to these
Yeah,
this
definitely.
reality. So yeah, tell us, yeah, who are these protagonists in your pictures?
Well, in real life, they're my nan and granddad. But for this project, I didn't want to focus on anything like photojournalism. I didn't want anything personal. So, and a large part of these images is that I didn't want there to be a structured narrative. I didn't want to feed a story. I just wanted to take kind of the thoughts and the feelings of everything that was going on in the current time and kind of recreate that through the imagery. I wanted to play with light, play with composition in a
Mhm.
way that I hadn't really tried to before, but in a way that I was always interested in.
So they're your grandparents in reality, but you kind of cast them in a way
Yeah,
as a
definitely.
director might, or yeah, you're basically stepping out of your own role as granddaughter and
Yeah,
actually
definitely.
working with them as characters in a sense. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely accurate.
Okay, interesting. So how was it kind of collaborating with your grandparents in such close quarters? Yeah, I mean, lockdown has been tricky because
Yeah,
in many ways, because we've been spending a lot of time with people we're very close to, which can, you know, which can be difficult sometimes,
yeah.
which can be wonderful other times. But yeah, how was it in terms of the collaboration between you and your kind of family member?
Well, luckily, most of the time I kind of took myself away, you know, to try and think of new ideas and come up with what I was going to do next. But one thing that definitely made it easier was because I didn't decide to do this as a photojournalism project, because this didn't have any rapport between me and my grandparents. By just having them as characters in a project, it created that disconnect because a lot of the images that I did, I kind of set them out myself. So I played around with the light, I played around with the composition,
Mhm.
where about in the house that I wanted these to be taken. That was all kind of independently done by me. And then once I had that right, I could just say to like my nan or my granddad, I could say, oh, can I just borrow you for 5 minutes? Can I
I
just
see. Yeah.
place you here?
So
So I think having that little bit of space made it a lot easier. It was
yeah.
still largely independent on my part. So
I
that
see. So
helped a
you
lot.
kind of fostered a professional kind of environment, really,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
yeah. So you kind of pre-staged these scenes. Was that your
Yeah.
process? You kind of you pre-imagined these scenes. Did you kind of sketch them out?
Yeah.
Did you have
Well,
ideas on how to compose them before the taking of them? Then I presume.
it was difficult at first because obviously, if you're in the same surroundings every day, you're not inspired by them. It just becomes normal to you. You can't see it in a new way. So I spent a lot of the days leading up to kind of creating this project just wandering around the house with my camera. And if there was, you know, particular lighting in one room, or I like the way something was set up, I'd take photos of that with no real intention on what they were yet. So then I could come back, you know, put them on my computer, have a look over, and then see if they kind of gave any feeling to me. You know, the ones that I like, the lighting that I like, the lighting that I felt evoked something, I could then go back to it and think, okay, now I can kind of sketch out a scene
Sure.
for
Okay.
this. And that's how I built up the images.
I see. So much like a location scout might, you know, work out before the shoot occurs, I guess. Yeah, that's really interesting that you kind of, you're wearing several hats, I guess, that you often see in cinema. So cinema is a kind of point of reference for you, as you mentioned in your biography. So yeah, can you tell us a bit about how that informs your practice?
Yeah, well, even when I was interested in doing fashion work originally, when I came to university, cinema was always that interest, that kind of inspiring factor that I was always drawn to. And even before I fully moved into doing work that was, you know, purely kind of stage, cinematic, experimental, I wrote a dissertation on the kind of the impact of cinema on fashion photography. So you know, that was me instilling the interest, and it wasn't until I got a chance to kind of sit and experiment that I could fully push through with that. But I'd say the biggest thing from cinema that interests me within my work is definitely the lighting and the way it can evoke mood, you know, a sense of tone. And also along with the composition, I like the way that in cinema you never really see the actor's eyes. They don't look into this camera, they don't look right at you. So I tried to implement that within these images as well, just to create more of a disconnect between me and the people I was photographing. And then that in turn also allows others to see it more as a narrative based story than
like they're viewing
a journalism one.
A glimpse into some kind of narrative. So I guess it's that 4/4, isn't it? That you're abiding to. So yeah, I definitely see these influences of cinema coming through. Science fiction, but also the kind of film noir and thriller kind of genres, the use of shadow and mystery. You know, the image of your grandma with shadow playing on the slats of shadow playing on her face. That's a real kind of resonates with the kind of thriller genre and the idea of being captive in a space. So there's a use of color, conscious kind of use of color running through these images as well. When you see them all on the wall, as you would if you were to visit the space, you can see that there's a you know, very conscious color scheme running through. Can you tell us a bit more about the process there and what your thinking was?
Well, I think for me and for many others, when this whole lockdown kind of set in, I feel like the main feelings were kind of, on one hand, despair and uncertainty, and the other kind of, you know, these moments of hope, of, you know, waiting, in a way, longing. And I thought the best way to represent that was with blues and yellows. You know, the blue being more melancholic, more kind of intense, the yellow kind of being more joyful, more rays of hope. And to further kind of push that idea, I wanted to keep any blue tones that I used in the imagery as artificial light. So I could really tone that down and I could really make it a bit more dramatic. And then when I use the yellows, I tried to use natural sunlight to give kind of that feeling of warmth, like that real warm feeling, that feeling of joy.
I think that works perfectly with the state we found ourselves in, which was you know, starved of natural light, and also, you know, just surrounded by the blue of our screens, for example, and also that, you know, that that feeling of being in the safest place possible in the world, but then at the same time feeling this strange feeling of dread and alienation for the last years.
Definitely.
So that weird paradoxical kind of feeling, your images really sum that up, I think. So so yeah, excellent. So can you tell us also, we can't see them on the screens here, just so you know, the audience knows, behind us is we're all in Kaylee's grandparents' house essentially. So you can't see the captions here, but yeah, they played an important part in your images in the exhibition. So could you tell us a bit about what they are and why you use them?
Yeah, well, two of my main inspirations for this work, as well as, the sci-fi, the cinema side, when it came to photographers, I was really interested in Philip Lorca de Corsier as well as Gregory Crewdson, who both do very kind of dramatic, cinematic stage looking imagery. And it's Gregory Crewdson's work that when he titles his work, he leaves it very, very simple, very, very straight to the point, often just who's in the photo or the place as well as the date, or sometimes just leaves it untitled. And I felt that was really fitting for my work to kind of further push the idea that there isn't a set narrative for this work. I want others to view it and create their own narrative from what they're seeing. So I didn't want to give too much information in the in what I named each photo, just so they had a little taster to structure their own story, but I wasn't feeding them anything myself.
Yeah, you also include the time as well, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Was that the accurate time at which the images were taken?
Yeah, it was the exact
time.
That's
interesting. That's interesting. So it's it's a fictional element, but also factually correct in some sense. So yeah, I mean again, the time brings in that sense of the endless hours of lockdown, I guess, and feeds into that feeling of just the time doing strange things, really speeding up and slowing down at the same time. So just to touch on your collaborating, big part of First Light, for those that don't know, is the collaboration between the artists, the photographers, and the writers, who have been involved in the project. So we paired a number of writers with each of the photographers according to similar interests. We try to apply a bit of intelligence when doing it, and so you were paired with Adrienne Wilkinson, and how was the process of working with her, the process of collaboration? Was this tell us a bit more about it.
It was really enjoyable, as I've already said. When the lockdown came into play, we had maybe a few days notice, if that, before all the universities closed. We couldn't meet in class anymore, so it was really difficult going from that structure of being able to be surrounded by other creatives and be able to get their opinions on a weekly basis, be able to be in conversation with them about what they were doing and what they're experimenting with, and that was just completely taken away. So being able to be connected with someone, another creative, through this exhibition, it was really welcome. It was really nice being able to just chat with someone again about creatively about the project, from
a different medium as well, I guess.
Definitely that made it all the more interesting, though, with her being a writer and me a photographer. The way that she kind of interpreted my work in a different way that I was seeing it, and it was just really nice. It was really nice being able to connect with people again after going so long without being able to do that.
So you mentioned new insights into a new way of looking at the work. Did you glean any specific insights from her writing, or through the process of research that she went through by interviewing you, etc.? Did you come to light about your own work?
I think it was mainly interesting to hear how other people perceived the work that I'd created, being able to hear their side of what they thought was going on, the thoughts, feelings that they were getting, and definitely the satisfaction of knowing that what I had photographed resonated the way that I wanted it to. I was getting the mood, the feelings of what we're all going through. I was being able to push that through with the project I was doing. So just hearing that from somebody else, as well as, like I said, you know, the ideas they had about the people in the
a nice feeling, kind of
the
vindication
project
was
was
actually, you know, landing home somewhere.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, at this point, thanks, Kelly. I just want to bring in David. So David was he's a course leader at Hugh Baird University Centre in Bootle, and he was Kaylee's tutor, am I right in saying, for the last for 3 years of her time on the course. So you've seen her work change and evolve, I imagine, David. And yeah, how has it developed over the course of the 3 years on your program?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Kaylee said, you know, she kind of came to us kind of with this sort of desire to be a fashion photographer, and that was everything that she wanted. But I think the reality and the kind of the desire are two necessarily different things. You know, the fashion world is quite a tough thing to kind of get into, and it's full of all kinds of logistical issues. And I think as we'd gone on through the course, she found that she'd had success working in other ways with other subject matters. And in year 2, she had done a small piece on her nan that I think kind of resonated within this later work, that the potential had been seen and found in that kind of small second year piece that had kind of her nan just photographed in a quite a remarkable way, you know. And I think when she'd, you know, when we'd gone into lockdown, she'd gone into lockdown with, I'm going to be making a fashion piece. And we realized the logistics of that were more and more complicated. And this piece then evolved out of kind of, you know, I guess the access and, you know, the prior work that she'd done before.
Yeah. So it's, it really presented an opportunity for her, really, didn't it? These kind of seeds were planted in the past, and which weren't fully developed. And it's strange in a way that it allowed her the time and the subject matter to actually to fully explore these ideas, perhaps.
No, definitely. As I said, that small set of experiments in the past kind of led to fruition within this kind of larger body of work.
I think it's an example of how restrictions can kind of lead to a concentrated way of focusing on a given subject. But it must have been a challenging year for tutors and students. Were some students able to thrive under these circumstances? I mean, thrive might be too strong a way of putting it, but just to overcome the obstacles. And
I mean, the impact on students was mixed depending on what stages they were in their projects when lockdown came at the end of March, and it depended how progressed their projects were. And you know, some students were quite kind of majorly impacted by it, but you know, other students, you know, we had year 2 and year 3 students whose projects really kind of blossomed out of lockdown and created the most imaginative and creative work that wouldn't have come, as negative as lockdown was and all the circumstances around it. You know, it kind of bore work that kind of came from nowhere or wouldn't have come from any other circumstance, you know. Often reflecting on lockdown itself, but you know, generally not in obvious ways or negative ways, in more kind of creative, more positive, more interesting ways.
It's certainly forced us to think quite laterally, really, and think outside of usual patterns of doing things to actually get things done, which we'll talk about a bit more about your kind of brings us onto your practice as well, I guess, in terms of thinking laterally. Can you tell us a bit more about, you know, having looked at your work, your practice is incredibly diverse, and it takes in all manner of genres. Can you tell us more about your recent projects and what drives your practice?
At the moment, kind of my practice is being sort of driven by my PhD, which is kind of, you know, more formally around kind of, you know, re-looking at urban landscape photography and looking at different ways to kind of drive that forward that may or may not have been kind of done before. So I think what we're seeing on screen now is the last piece of work I did with the Open Eye Gallery that was in the UK Hong Kong peer-to-peer festival. And this was a virtual reality exhibition. So this was November of last year. So, you know, as I said, you know, with COVID, things were difficult. So virtual reality seemed like a kind of a good way forward. But in fact, the work comes from the game Red Dead Redemption, and actually kind of effectively being a photographer within the game. The character that you are playing within the game has a camera, and you have this opportunity to explore this unexplored landscape as it opens up and develops in front of you. What intrinsically interested me in this was that, you know, the early geographical survey photographers of the American West in the 1860s, 1870s, you know, they were doing this job of looking at how the American West could be populated. You know, they were funded by the government to go out and discover, and that work has had a great influence on landscape photography that has come after. As part of my research, you know, what I then was looking at is the game gave me an opportunity to reenact that kind of process of discovery, with kind of, you know, and look at the parallels between the kind of the real world and what the American West has become, sorry, and the world that is within the game as an experience.
The kind of mythology of the West, I guess, which is reimagined.
You know, I guess like Kaylee has found with the work she's done working with the writer, you know, I also looked for writing that went with it and found kind of very diarific work of photographers like Henry Jackson, and that became part of the prose within the work to kind of give it an authenticity of kind of diary evidence of thoughts of the photographer as he kind of as he explored the West.
Was this a kind of lockdown not inspired but caused by project? I mean, was it it
wasn't. It started quite a long time before as a key concept, but just as opportunities arise, you know, the opportunity of the UK Hong Kong Festival came, and that suddenly brings everything to a head and a conclusion as such. So it happened to conclude around them because of that opportunity. But in fact, it had been probably running, you know, possibly since kind of, you know, the summer.
Yeah.
You know, and to, you know, a lot of my work, well, last few pieces of my work have been kind of involved with my son, you know, and in fact I discovered the game through my son's playing of the game and watching him playing and seeing the character as a camera. So I kind of, you know, the discovery was through that, and my son was intrinsically involved in sort of the making of the work, and that he would ride my character out into this wilderness. And he was like the photographer's assistant, and he'd get me off the horse, give me the camera in the hand, and I would wander around and take pictures. He would also kill me quite regularly within the game as we'd get attacked by wolves, you know, bandits, whatever. So he would often do things that I wasn't quite happy with, but there was, so it became part of our relationship and our play as we developed that work.
Yeah, I see. So, I mean, it does seem like a really fitting work, you know, for the period that we're going through, you know, this kind of the exploration into the virtual world when the physical world is inaccessible to us.
Yeah.
Like it seems very timely anyway, by whether it's by accident or intention, really. So yeah, in terms of your future work now you've kind of finished that work, are you continuing to, would you go back and work in a more using an actual camera, which isn't a physical camera, and take photographs of of people and landscapes, or is that kind of behind you now? Is it you kind
I've
of
got to be. I'm conscious. I've got to finish my PhD off, so I'm conscious not to move too far before I actually get this documented and written down and submitted.
Mm.
But I think one of the things that interested me about photography is photography itself, and the project before the New West was all analog and shot in 5.4 and 10.8.
Yeah,
I don't want to lose those skills that I was trained in. The
sure.
project before that was web-based,
Yeah.
so I'm always interested in playing with things. We had a brief. I'm gonna try and see whether this shows on camera, because we spoke about this briefly in the rehearsals for this. But actually, my new work is 3D now, and I'm kind of I'm interested in 3D photography and 3D printing, and I don't know if this will show, but this is now my son in 3 dimensions,
Yeah.
kind of as photographed by me and printed.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going with this at the moment, but I find it kind of quite interesting that actually, is it photography anymore? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But should photography stop at a 2-dimensional medium? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
But as I said, the idea that we can actually produce miniatures as well, that's quite intriguing to me now.
Yeah, I think the constant theme throughout all of these talks has been this melting of these boundaries, really, that we were used to, and of what defined photography. In Kaylee's work, kind of fact and fiction becomes blurred. Documentary ceases to be a kind of definitive kind of description of the work. And in your case, is it 3D, is it 2D, is it sculpture? What is photography now is a constantly kind of interesting question, really. So how do you help students navigate this new tricky terrain of the virtual and the physical, and all these boundaries which are no longer fixed, if they're ever fixed in the first place?
I mean, it's a tough challenge. I think I think one of the things we sort of pride ourselves within the course, there are several tutors that work on the course, and it's actually trying to understand each student's individual kind of journey and each individual kind of learning journey, and we are basically just facilitators within that journey. And our breadth of knowledge and breadth of experience hopefully draws out what appears to be the most interesting or the most creative or the most challenging elements for that student. In Kaylee's case, it was drawing out of that kind of cinematic narratives of staged photography. In other students, it's documentary, or it's socially engaged, or it's whatever. We have no kind of particular theme or style within the course. It's about kind of focusing on the individual. And the tutors have got a breadth of knowledge so that hopefully we can actually give options. The thing about education is it gives people options.
Yeah, absolutely. So help them discover themselves, really, and their practice. Okay, so I just want to bring Kaylee back in. So there's a few themes that we touched on, which would be quite nice to expand on, I think, at this point. So I've been at the space every week at the exhibition, and visitors come into the space, and they're confronted by Kaylee's work, which is quite near the entrance, and it invites immediate kind of responses and engagement with it, really, because maybe perhaps because of what we've been through, but just the nature of the work just it really kind of draws people in. And whenever I make sure to talk to people who come in and see how they're interpreting the work. And there's been so many different kind of rich interpretations of the work, which aren't necessarily to do with lockdown at all, really. And some just off the top of my head. So the kind of anxieties about growing old, for example, that's what some people think the project is about, or a document of a difficult relationship, or the documentary project based in a care home, for example. All these readings are coming in, and people feel quite strongly about it, and they leave feeling quite kind of moved, or they project something of themselves in it. So what do you make of the readings of these kind of myriad readings of the work, Kaylee?
I'm very pleased about that, because as I've already mentioned, I didn't create this work with a narrative. I didn't create it with the intention of feeding a solid story or telling anyone who these characters are or what's going on. So the fact that people are making their own narratives from seeing this, it's exactly the outcome that I wanted.
Mm.
And even when taking these images, I made the decision to include images that had maybe little tidbits of information that necessarily weren't set in a storyline for me. Like there is an image of it's my nan with her hands on the table and there's a wedding ring, and to me personally, that doesn't, that's not a part of the story that I've created. There's no kind of solid storyline around that, but somebody else may view that and take that as a key component. And I think it's really interesting how with all forms of artwork, really, people take from it, they take from it what they're feeling in the moment or what they want to take from it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think that's so important when it comes to artwork. So I'm glad that people are seeing this and they're making their own stories based off of it. And I'm glad that they're also varied as well. So that makes me really happy.
Good. Yeah. What about you, David? What do you think about this? That people are bringing so much. It seems to be completely open to interpretation. Is that a success of the work?
Yeah. No, I think we worked, even though we were in lockdown. There's a kind of strong digital backbone to the course, and all our students make digital journals, so we could continue to work very carefully with editing and selection of the work with Kaylee. And I think that was one of the things we'd hoped that would come out of it, that there was these kind of interpretable kind of narratives kind of in there. And I think some of that, looking at Adrianne's writing, you can see her picking some of those kind of, sort of creating her own interpretations, but also seeing some of the openness that kind of Kaylee put into it.
Yeah, I mean, the project is visually really, strong and arresting, but it's ambiguous enough that people can pour their own kind of biographies into it, if you like. Yeah.
But I think it's a recognizable setting as well.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not being rude to your grandparents. It's a fairly average house, as such. So it's familiar.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely.
In lots of ways. Yeah.
Especially coming out of this thing we've been through as well. I think that plenty of people have. People found it hard to look at, some people actually, in terms of, because it's quite raw, what we've just come through. So it's quite challenging work in that respect. But a strong kind of reaction is great, I think. It's working. I'd take that as a sign. So what next for you, Kaylee? Do you think, in terms of, do you think you'll pick up this kind of your former love of fashion and rejoin that kind of trajectory, do you think, or do you think it's set you on a completely different path now?
I think there's, with something that I pursued wanting to do for so long, I think there's always a potential to come back to fashion or to implement it in some way. But the most important takeaway that I've gotten from the experience of, not only being a part of this exhibition, but also creating my final work, was that time it gave me to experiment with my interest in more cinema style work, more staged, more narrative based, and just having that time to play around with it has made me realize how much more I want to do with it. I'd like to improve my skills and create more work like this, whether this is a style that I can develop and then combine with other forms of work in the future is, you know, who knows, but I definitely want to keep creating cinematic style work and just
Yeah.
seeing how far I can take it.
I mean, to me, it feels like it's been a perfect kind of testing ground for you, but, you know,
Yeah.
not a testing ground, but yeah, a ground on which you can play with these ideas, play with these techniques, and now you have the skills and a way of working. You can apply that to other subjects,
Yeah,
perhaps. You know, that's
definitely.
so, yeah. Very much look forward to seeing what you apply that to. Yeah. No. So thanks, guys. That's been fascinating. So I think it's a good point for me to try and do justice to Adrian's wonderful response to Kaylee's photographs. So apologies in advance, Adrian, if I fluff any of the lines, but bear with me. Between the Dusk and the Golden Hour by Adrian Wilkinson on Kaylee Clemenson. In this house, sunlight and twilight sit in intimate conversation. Blues and yellows frame each photograph, holding domestic moments in a semi-fiction. The artist's family home seen through new, strange eyes. Tommy and Karine sit among mirrors, iPads, glasses, beds, bathed in golden light or the blue of twilight. The home becomes a stage. Clemenson comments, I did not want to give it a personal feel. The staging of the photographer's family home, nevertheless, conjures feelings of intimacy and fragility as the private dwelling and the lives of Karine, Tommy, and the unseen photographer become theatre. In an essay about storytelling, Ursula Le Guin says, it gets dark and stormy when you look away from the campfire. Clemenson's work balances the warmth of the fire with a quiet thing that sits behind it. The microcosm of the family home gestures to the existential home. The dawn that is promised by dusk, a generational promise of futurity, and ultimately the death that is promised by life. Clemenson balances avoidance and anticipation in the photographs taken between March and May 2020 as the UK lockdown began. As I look, I want to plunge myself in and swim through the coldness to meet the gazes of Tommy and Karine, who, like the campfire, reflect warmth out into the dark. In Tommy, 9:31, and Karine, 4:41, the characters come family members are met with intense light in both the dusk blue that engulfs Tommy and the slices of sun that reveal Karine. The onlooker's eye is never met. Doubleness reveals itself in reflections in the mirror, refractions of the glass, the evasive eyes of Karine and Tommy. The photos play with absence and presence. The table is set, but for who? Clemenson's photographs avoid straightforward photojournalism, entering into a space somewhere between fiction and reality. The artist describes her process, stalking her house, camera in hand, searching for a narrative. Weeks were spent testing the light and shadow. She describes feeling like a voyeur of her own home. Clemenson's process reflects the impulse to search for narrative in moments of crisis or uncertainty, the comfort of storytelling becoming our way through unprecedented times. As the outside world begins to feel unreal, Clemenson creates a staged reality, a play in which we are all participating, reflecting stories back to one another around the campfire. That was wonderful, Adrian. I hope I did okay there. Yeah, really fantastic piece of writing, I think. So yeah, how about, what did you make of it, David?
Yeah, I mean, there was some kind of key bits in it that I found interesting. You know, I kind of like, you know, we've talked about this slightly already, but the line that kind of says the onlooker's eye is never met, and I think that's a kind of key to the piece, as you'd said, it's the cinematic fourth wall. It turns you into a voyeur of this life that you were looking in at, and you know, the recognition of that in the writing is nice. I also like the kind of the ending lines as well. As the outside world begins to feel unreal, Clemenson creates a stage reality, a play that we are participating, reflecting stories back on one another's around the campfire. I think, you know, I made a note here, said, you know, we may look back at these works, you know, at a point when hopefully we are out of the kind of pandemic situation, and we are out of the kind of the lockdowns we are, and we've possibly forgotten about how life was through this period. You know, hopefully that will be a point, you know, and I said we may look back at these works then and reflect on, actually they may remind us of things that happened that actually we kind of probably deeply want to forget about, you know, but you know, said strange and dangerous times.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember. I can already see my mind shifting to normality as if it never happened. You know, it's almost feels we're still in it. I realize, but it feels kind of somewhat distant already. How the human mind moves on, really. But just to have that reminder in future years of what this went through, and this is, you know, a document of that time in a sense. So yeah, no, it's. I think she captures that very well. What did you think, Kaylee? Anything that sticks out for you in terms of anything that
I'm really happy that I was paired with Adrienne, because I feel like she really understood the tone and the mood of the work. I feel like she really connected with it in a way that I wanted it to be connected with. And if this piece of work were to have maybe longer captions or more description to go along with it, I think what she's written has captured it perfectly, and it's written in a tone that's a similar tone to what you feel looking at the images. It reads how I see it, which I think is just, it's perfect. Yeah,
I quite agree. Yeah, it's tonally, it's a really perfect accompaniment. Yeah. And yeah, for me it was that campfire image that you're left with. I mean, what's interesting was it began as photographs, your photographs, which a writer responded to in words, and then with that final line you're left with another image in your, so there's this kind of it's interesting process from word to from image to word to image to mental image. So fascinating. So that leaves us with just a few minutes left for some great questions that we've got from the audience. So one guest asks, this one's for Kaylee. I'd really love to know how your grandparents felt about being photographed. So
I mean, I'm not too sure how they felt about it, but unfortunately for them, they didn't have much choice with the situation I was in. I do know that my granddad in particular has been, in the past, he's done a little bit of extra work, you know, he's interested in the whole acting scene, so he was quite on board with it. And luckily my nan, she has this look to her in which she can look quite distant, she can look quite melancholic, she can look the way in which I want it to look for these images. They were both comfortable with it. I'm sure they had
perfect casting, wasn't it? So and you know, they were delighted when they came to the show. They, you know, so you know,
they were happy about that.
No, it's great, kind of family project really that everyone rallied. So so we have another question from Sarah Fisher. This one for Kaylee as well. So the atmosphere of the shoot is very coherent, so you really succeeded in invoking cinema, and with the title suggests the drama of the everyday. I wonder if this shoot would influence any future work with fashion. Yeah, that's an interesting one.
I think it definitely could. I mean, you know, as I said earlier, I really want to grow my skills in this area. You know, I want to get a better understanding of light, and I really want to push working with staged imagery and setting tone and mood and narratives using all of these compositional and lighting elements. And I could definitely see it reworking its way back into creating fashion work in the future.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I think it could really work, that
Mm.
synergy between this, you know, atmospheric cinematic
Yeah.
and you know, with featuring fashion, you know,
Yeah.
clothing and objects. I think that's that's a good suggestion, I think. So finally, we've got one from Megan Jenkins. Kaylee talks so beautifully about her work, and the cinematic tone is very emotive and beautiful. I wonder if she has carried on this project in any capacity since lockdown has eased. Was it? That's a good question. Was it a full stop, having at the end of your degree, or is it something that is potentially ongoing? I mean, is it completely finished?
In terms of this particular piece of work being about lockdown, and you know, with us kind of coming out of it and slowly getting back to normality, I haven't carried on this particular piece of work. But as Dave said earlier, at the end of second year, I believe, I did start to create work that was in a similar tone to this. It was a taster of the kind of work I've done now. And I'd like to continue with, you know, this kind of work around the house, including family members. I don't think it'll necessarily follow on exactly, but I would like to do something similar, carry on from it in a way. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, great. Okay, that's we're nearly out of time, so I think we'll probably leave it there. But thank you so much, David and Kaylee, for joining us. That was a really fascinating session, and thanks to all the audience for following along for the last few weeks. We're coming to the end of these talks, and you've still got another week and a half or so to catch the exhibition. So please come along. I'm there on Thursdays, 2 more Thursdays left. In Warrington, so it's the Castlefield New Art Spaces in Warrington, Castlefield Gallery, New Art Spaces in Warrington, get that right. So yeah, do please come and say hello. And we'll be launching this publication, as I said at the beginning. So yeah, please keep your eyes out for that. Thanks also, as always, to Natalie at OpenEye for smooth running of the show behind the scenes, and to all of our partners involved in the project. Thanks to everyone who's just continued to tune in. We really appreciate you spending your evenings with us. So yeah, without further ado, I don't know if you guys watching the football tonight, or is this what's your no
maybe.
Yeah, I get quite passionate about the football for some reason. I don't only during kind of international championships. I'm one of those people. But yes, have a good night, everyone, whether you're watching the football or fastidiously ignoring it. And thanks guys.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
Okay, cheers, David. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.